Hi guys, my name is Wildkard and welcome back to my channel. So this big game this weekend is the semi-final round for Super Rugby AU between the ACT Brumbies and the Western Force. Now there's been a fairy tale run for the Western Force up to this point, and they're up against the defending champions from last year's Super Rugby AU, the ACT Brumbies, away in Canberra. It's a very, very intriguing match to see what the Western Force can do to maybe potentially keep the fairy tale running and push themselves into position to potentially win Super Rugby AU and make a historic statement about the club and their exit a few years ago from Super Rugby. This is if the Western Force beats the Brumbies on the weekend, this will be probably the biggest upset in Super Rugby for many years from since probably for at least 3 years, I would say. Probably 3 years, yeah. And everything is on the line. It's elimination. And the Brumbies has been very dominant throughout the season, but in the last few games, there's aspect of the Brumbies game that are flawed and not as impenetrable as they've been since compared to their start of the season. Whereas the Western Force kind of had a reversal of their performances. They had a very good poor run at the start, and then they lost to Brumbies, heavy defeat Brumbies last time they met. And then they turned that around by going on a 3-win streak, including beating the undefeated Queensland Reds in the final game of the season last week at home in the Force Fields in Perth. A last-minute heroic defense and, beat the Reds by 3 points at home. Very good. So the Force, if you were to look at the average performance throughout the season, they're not going to be able to beat the Brumbies. But if the Force pull out another historic performance like they did against the Reds, the Brumbies, there's a possibility that they beat the Brumbies. I would say it's literally a game where you want to see whether or not last week's performance was a fluke or was just the Reds underestimating the Force, or the Force actually improved on their gameplay and can build on that to the next step and go up against the Brumbies. But let's have a look at the team sheet. So at the fullback, Brumbies have Tom Banks up against Jake Strachan. Tom Banks has been very good for the Brumbies. In the last few games, he has single-handedly made huge breaks. I think he may have a solo try against the Waratahs. He's very good, and his kicking from fullback position is incredibly far. He has a very big boot. So Tom Banks is an absolute danger man for the Force, especially at the start of the game. If you are taking a nap, Banks will punish you and potentially take points from you right away from the ball. So Tom Banks is definitely one of the big players for the Brumbies and needs to be neutralized early for Force to if they wanted to get ahead. Andy Muirhead at number 14, a very good try finisher for the Brumbies. Against he would be up against Jordan Olowofela. Jordan Olowofela is a former under-20 England national team winger, and he had a absolute incredible game against the Reds. He was instrumental in beating the Reds last week. He scored 3 tries, including just outstanding individual tries. I think 2 outstanding individual tries up against the Reds, and he's an absolute superstar. So Jordan Olowofela is a guy to watch out for the Force team. If he can break the Brumbies line, if anyone can break the Brumbies line from the Force team, it will be him. He's extremely fast. Against Andy Muirhead, who's the Brumbies blindside winger. Len Aikaitu, the Brumbies centre. Richard Kahui, the Western Force centre, the former All Black Richard Kahui. He has been very, very instrumental in Western Force wins in the last few rounds where it was very clutch, very close. And, the former All Black showed why he was in probably the greatest All Blacks team in the history and winning the World Cup. And, he is absolutely outstanding, especially when it comes to clutch games. He's able to bond everyone together about him, unite everyone around him, and really put up solid finishes for the Western Force. Something that Brumbies actually lack. Brumbies finishing last, in the second half has been, outside of the one game where they kicked a win against the Rebels, the Brumbies second half has been noticeably worse than the first half in the last few rounds. Iran Simone up against Kyle Goodwin, and Tom Wright against Tony Pulu. Tom Wright came back from an injury for the Brumbies, and he is very, very in form as well. He's the danger man for the Brumbies. I think he scored at least one try last game, and his running has been just like his running and stepping, and just the angles that he takes when he runs to the defense line is just outstanding. Like Tom Wright, you give him any space, he will crack your defense. He's incredibly good, not a danger man to look at. So Andy Muirhead is also good, but I think Tom Wright's probably more likely to score a try. So Tom Banks and Tom Wright, probably the top two likely persons to have scored the first try for the Brumbies. And then the Western Force, I think Jordan Olua-Fela will be the most likely person to score a try. Nola Lolesio, the fly half, his kicking has been very good, which is what you want for fly half. He's pretty, he's very young still. He's pretty standard. He's got a big, bright future ahead of him. His kicking is probably the main thing. His goal kicking rate is very, very high. And Domingo Miotti, he's the reserve for the Argentina national team. He's the replacement, most likely, for Sanchez in the Argentina number 10 position national team. And his kicking, Miotti, has been a little bit lacking. His goal kicking, he has missed two kicks against the Reds. So it's very, very important for Miotti to get 100% of his kicks in the weekend against the Brumbies. If he misses any of the kicks, I think the Force is gonna really, really struggle. I think Lolesio has a slightly higher kicking percentage than Miotti, and also Miotti has a little bit of defensive issue. His tackling is a bit high, so sometimes he gets pumped off. So he's definitely have to improve on that defense. His tackling, especially, if the Western Force wants to hold up against the Brumbies. So I think there could be a play where they will run Tom Banks into Miotti around the rocks, and Tom Banks could potentially just run him over. That could potentially be a try right there, where get Tom Banks or Tom Wright. I think Muirhead's pretty big, and he can run on him as well. So Miotti is a big defensive issue in the back line for the Force, and you have to, hopefully they have something to he's improved, and hopefully they especially his kicking, he's playing a very, very important role for the Western Force, and he needs to lift this game a little bit if they wants to survive here. Nick White, the Wallabies halfback, very good. His kicking has been off. His box kick has been bit off. He's not as good as he was at the start of the season towards the end. So I'm not going to be... he's very fast off the breakdowns. Very clinical. He's in terms of his passing. He's very good at identifying spaces around the rocks. But his box kicks and just general kicking has been a little bit off in last few weeks. Thomas Kubeli, he's been very, very good for the Western Force. Really not much to complain about. Now in the 4-pack, this is where the hurt comes in for the Brumbies. This is where the brute force of the Brumbies comes in. The 4-pack, James Slipper, 100 Wallabies cap, the most cap Wallabies at the moment in the Wallaby squad. James Slipper against Tom Robinson. He's actually against Santiago Medrano. He's a Argentina international, which is Argentina international. Folau Faenga, I think he's maybe one of the top try scorers for Brumbies. He's one that gets the ball at the end of the rolling maul. Alan Alatoa, again, Wallabies, this is literally the Wallabies front row right here against Tom Robinson and Fileti Kaitu. So this front row is incredibly dangerous. They are only slightly less than the Reds front row against Tupou. Okay, not the Reds reserves. Only Tupou is better than this front row in the Brumbies team. And the set pieces, the way they can set up a platform with this front row it's literally world class. It's very, very hard to break their setup in the mauls. And their scrum is very solid. However, the Force played against the Reds last week were able to really, really crack the Reds front row. The only front row, like I said, in the scrummaging especially, is Tenela Tupou. And the Western Force not only able to neutralize Tupou in the scrums, they actually had at least two that I remembered, full-on penalty tied head wins against the Red scrum. And that was against Tupou as well. So the experience from the Western Force front row up against the experience of the Brumbies front row is very close. So I don't see the Brumbies able to just win tight heads against the Western Force in scrummaging. But in the lineouts, in the mauls, the Western Force might have to put in a bit more work, because the absolute meat grinder that the Brumbies put on from a lineout maul is incredibly hard to stop, even for a very experienced team like the Queensland Reds. And the Force Wilds has done well against the Reds in their mauls. The Brumbies maul is one level above that. So the scrums, I'm not too worried. In fact, you might see the Western Force put a very good scrum up against Brumbies and probably win a tight head, because they did really well last week. If they put up the same performance, they would win tight heads against Brumbies. But the maul is really, really, really a big issue that the Brumbies, the Force has to really deal with. Darcy Swain, Caden Neville up against Jeremy Thrush and Selakai Tamani. This is kind of like the powerhouse in the 4-pack. This is where the maul and the scrum and the line out kind of like the technical pieces of the play. So yeah, again, this is really up to the Western Force to try to neutralize the Tie 5 from the lineouts. I think maybe there wouldn't be, if the ball is really close to the line, the Force might not opt to contest the ball and just try to sack the maul as soon as they can. But in the scrums, I'm not too worried about the scrums for the Force. I think the scrums will be pretty even. Loose forwards, Rob Valentini up against Kang Koteka. Rory Scott up against Fergus Lee Warner. Pete Samu up against Bernard Standard. So that's the loose forwards in terms for both teams. I would say maybe the Brumbies have a slight edge in the loose forwards in terms of their breakdown work. But the Force is definitely picking up in the last few weeks in their breakdown work as well. The forwards, the loose forwards from the Force has been working really, really hard around the breakdown and instrumental in beating the Reds at the breakdown in many, many, many very critical times during that game. So that is the starting 15. Now the replacements, I think this is the danger. This is where the Western Force has done really, really, really well and instrumental in winning the last 3 games is their replacements. The amount of experience and cohesion and like just technical skills that the Force brings on in their reserves is something that they could really punish the Brumbies. So the reserves, Lachlan Lonergan, he's pretty good. He plays 10. He will replace Nola Seo, he's very good long-range kicking as well. Scott Seo, Tom Ross, Nick Frost, Luke Reimer, Ryan Lonergan, Risaj Pasatoa, Mackenzie Hansen, up against Andrew Reddy, Angus Warner, Greg Holmes. This is a replacement tight head prop, former Reds prop. So he's definitely going to make sure the scrum stays steady in the second half. And this is probably where the reserve Brumbies scrums are going to struggle. This is potentially see a full-on penalty against the Brumbies when Holmes comes on in the second half. Potentially, that could be a turning point for the Force. Ryan Mccauley, Tim Anstey has been extremely good for the Force coming off the bench. I think he scored a instrumental, maybe match-winning try a couple weeks ago against the Rebels coming off the bench. Ian Pryor, he is the captain, I believe. His halfback is very good at directing traffic around the breakdown. He's very quick, very clinical. So I think Ian Pryor, in terms of his pace, is slightly faster than Kubeli, but his kicking is not as good in terms of around the field. But in the second half, where you don't really want to kick the ball that much, you want to hold on to the ball and attack quickly, Ian Pryor is your man, and he's in the perfect position to do that, to finish the game for the Western Force. Jack McGregor and Henry Taifu are all on the bench. So that is the matchup for the Western Force against Brumbies. So basically, the Western Force needs to absorb the first half, the big punches from the Brumbies, from the tight five, in that more line out in the first half, and really have to, try to plug this hole here where Mccauley, the defensive issue here with Mccauley, and hopefully the Brumbies backline doesn't run too many balls through Mccauley if Force can protect him. So that's the kind of how I see the game play out. Trying to protect Mccauley in the backline and really get the forwards to work hard to neutralize. Really not to try to win the up from battle per se, but try to just neutralize and absorb and not concede too many points against the front row. And when the reserves come on for the Force, I do think the Force will have a bit of an advantage in the reserves. I think the pace that Ian Pryor and brings onto the field, the clinical breakdown for Anstey, I think Holmes in terms of holding up the scrums, I think the Force could potentially, and combined with the experience that's already on the field, like Richie Kahui, I think the Force is potentially pull ahead in the second half, and maybe that is one path I can see for a win for the Western Force. So if we were to look at the historic games, the Force has lost all games against the Brumbies in pretty big margins in the last 4 meetings. And this is a Super Rugby AU 21. That basically, ever since they came back, they have not beaten the Brumbies. And they've been lost. They've been, take quite a beating against the Brumbies. I do believe that Brumbies has won every game except losing to Reds. So, and the problem with the Brumbies is that if you look at some of the recent performances, this one here, the Waratahs against the Brumbies, Waratahs is at the bottom of the table, and the Waratahs has been pretty poor this season. They lost every game, and the Brumbies, despite that, it's the score showing 22-24. In this game, in particular, is that the Brumbies were literally 21 points to nil up at one point in the first half. The Brumbies way ahead. I think, no, it wasn't 21 points to nil. It was 21 points to 6. It was the Brumbies are way ahead, just absolutely smashed through the Waratahs in the first half. And then they literally could not score points in the second half at all. And the Waratahs were able to chip back, and got really close to pulling up an upset against the Brumbies. So the Brumbies, again, here, when the Brumbies lost to the Reds, they were basically came out flying start. I think 2 tries straight off the bat against the Reds, and just slowly the pressure and intensity fell off, and everything's starting to get a bit clunky, and the Reds were able to pull back and eventually win the game in the last dying stages against the Brumbies in the second half. So Brumbies has a bit of a record for like a really, really fast and furious start where they will put like points on the board right away with just, precision, intensity, and just like absolute clinical set piece from either a maul or maybe a scrum. So they will always come out fast and furious, and then they would fall off in the second half. And the Force, on the other hand, in their recent matches is kind of the opposite. They would take a beating at the start from both they took one from the Rebels and they took a bit of a beating from the Waratahs at the start, and then they will slowly crawl back and eventually clutch a win towards the end, especially the one against the Rebels, where they were down, I think, by a lot, like 15 points to 6 or something, or maybe even more than that. And they were just able to slowly crawl back, and eventually they had to go for a try to win the game, and they did in the last, and that's just a lot of gut, a lot of determination to win. So the Force really can push that extra performance coming off the bench. So it's kind of like to see which side of the game, which half the game it's going to be. It's like basically a game of two halves. The first half, if the Force can minimize damage from the Brumbies, and second half is how much, the Force can push the Brumbies and really break the team. And the Brumbies is about, first half, try to get as big of a lead as they can, and second half, try not to fall apart like they've done in the past 2 to 3 games. Yeah, so interesting to see. Hopefully, the Western Force pull up another upset. I think the experience is there for the team to do it. They have, absolute top world-class quality players in their team. And they've been building. There's a lot of cohesion in the team. A lot of the team are gelling really, really well in the last few weeks as well. So there is definitely a possibility for the Western Force to beat the Brumbies. It's not going to be... I don't see this game to be a one-sided win for the Brumbies, despite, the last few results that showing to be the case. One of the things that the Western Force, I think, I have a lot of confidence in is the Western Force 4-pack. They did really, really well against the Reds. I think if they're putting another strong performance against the Brumbies, a win is definitely within reach, if not attainable, for the Western Force. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video. Let me know what you think of the results going to be for this game. Let me know your predictions in the comments below. And thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the weekend for the reviews of the games of Super Rugby Aotearoa round 10 and the semi-final game on Saturday. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Cheers.